Good morning. I was wanting to give you an update today on the job support scheme that was announced by the Chancellor last week. So there are two sides to this scheme. There's the JSS Open, which is where businesses are still open, but they've been impacted by the effects of COVID. So they've been facing decreased demand, for instance. And the other side is the JSS Closed, where businesses have been legally required to close as a result of COVID restrictions, such as reduced to delivery or collection only businesses, or those that are restricted to providing food or drink outside, for instance. Employers cannot claim both the open and the closed scheme. It is one or the other. And as always, more details are going to be announced by the government at the end of October, we're promised. However, the lowdown on both schemes. So the open scheme, the employees need to work at least 20%, that's a fifth, or 1 day out of 5 if they're on a 5-day week. The employer pays for those hours that are worked. The employee gets a further 66.67%, which is a third of the pay for hours not worked. And of that proportion, the employer pays 5% now, and the government pays 61.67%. So in total, the employee walks away with 73% of their normal wages. The grant, as always, is restricted to a maximum of £1,541.75 for the month. On the closed scheme, however, employees don't work, but they receive 2/3 of their normal pay from their employer and is reimbursed by the government to a maximum of £2,083.33 per month. The aim, of course, is to protect jobs and allow employers to reopen quickly when they're allowed. But I should mention that this scheme is only available whilst restrictions are in place. So if the government lifts the restrictions and you're allowed to reopen, then you will no longer be eligible to claim this, even if you choose to remain closed. You also must have ceased work for a minimum of 7 consecutive calendar days. So for both schemes, there's some things which are universal to both. So employers can top up if they so wish. They must have been on the payroll PAYE system with an RTI submission to HMRC between the 6th of April 2019 and midnight on the 23rd of September 2020, which is just before the scheme was announced. So prior furlough is not a condition of the scheme, but you do have to make sure that you're eligible within that time period. Another key point is that the claims this time are in arrears rather than upfront ahead of a payroll. So the scheme opens from the 8th of December, but it is valid from the claims are open on the 8th of December, but the scheme itself opens on the 1st of November, so next week. And it's open and running for 6 months at the moment until the end of April 2021. All this may change, you never know. So just keep in contact with the legislation as it comes out. I should say that almost all of our clients fit into the small or medium bracket of size businesses. But for larger employees who employ more than 250 staff, they must undertake a financial impact test to determine if they do have a downturn in their revenue and so on, and whether they're eligible. So there's a separate process that they need to go through to make a declaration before they can claim. So other than that, other key points to note are the national minimum wage. So that must be in place. So any hours worked, you have to make sure that the national minimum wage rates apply and that you are paying for all hours actually worked. Employers must have reached a written agreement with the employee and maintain such records for 5 years, and they must be available upon request if HMRC ask, as usual. That is a very key point, though. Just similar to the furlough scheme, when you started, before furloughing anybody, you had to have a written agreement. It's an alteration to the employee's contract, and that has to be agreed by both parties and held on record. You cannot claim for employees who have been made redundant or are serving their notice. You may be able to rehire and put them on the scheme if they meet the criteria for when they were employed in the first place on an RTI being submitted. but if they are serving notice or being made redundant, you cannot claim. All national insurance tax, pension payments, they are payable as normal, but by the employer. The government will not be covering those as they did in the earlier instances of the job retention scheme. And the other thing to mention is that this doesn't affect the ability to claim the forthcoming job retention bonus that was connected to the job retention scheme, which closes at the end of October. So if you're meeting the eligibility criteria for the job retention bonus in respect of those employees, then that won't be affected. Last thing is the reference salary to use for the calculations for the job support scheme. Those on fixed pay, you work out the greater of the last pay period on or before the 23rd of September 2020 or the 19th of March 2020. So work out both, whatever is the greater, that's the reference salary you use for this claim. The reference salary for variable pay is the greater of three things. One, either the wages in the same calendar period in the 1920 tax year, or the average wages in the 1920 tax year, or the average wages from the 1st of February 2020, or whenever they started, if it was later than that, and the 23rd of September 2020. So again, calculate all three, whatever's the greatest, that is the reference salary for that employee for the future claims for the job support scheme. The good news is agents can do these calculations and submit them on the client's behalf. So if you need any help with that, you know where we are.